Hey friends, welcome back to designing your first font in Glyphs Mini. In the last episode, we made some good progress with a couple characters, a few easy ones like the lowercase j and the lowercase v, and then we also tackled everybody's favorite character, the s. In this episode, we're actually going to continue the progress that we made by using the v to round out our lowercase alphabet. So let's jump in. We're going to start by making this a little bit easy because the lowercase w is just a couple of v's that seem to find their way together. Now, it's very tempting to go ahead, grab a couple of v's like that, and call it a day. Now, it tends to be very tempting to take two v's, plop them together, and call it a day, but like I had mentioned when we did the lowercase m, we actually don't want it to be that wide because then the letter ends up being too wide. So similar to what we did here where we had a lowercase n and we had 6 units of space here, and then I just dropped 1 unit off, so then it's 5 units of space. We're going to do something similar with the w here. I don't know if it's going to be exactly 1 unit of space that gets taken out here, but we'll go ahead and see how that looks. So what we're going to do, at least to start, is I'm going to go through and we're just going to kind of narrow it up. So I took 5 units off on each side here. So we've got basically a narrower V at this point. The other thing that I'm probably going to take a look at is going through and even just narrowing up this one a little bit at the top here. And if I did this right, that's 70 units of space, and that is 65. It's tempting to go even more so that this is even, but I'm going to see if I can get away with a little less taper. So there is some there. It's 5 units of space versus, I think, what is this, 15, if I'm doing my math right? Well, it's about 10 units of space too. But regardless, I think that should be enough because similar to what we did down here where things tapered in, we are now going to have a new problem at the top because, make sure I get all my lines corrected here, but basically we're going to have a similar issue at the top of the W here where we've got these two joining together and then also creating a bit of a bottleneck there. Something I may even do is just narrow that up as well. But basically we're trying to manage the how everything's kind of clashing together here. It may be a situation too, because we narrowed this up, that some of these just have to move in a little bit more. If it helps and you have your V next to you, sometimes you can kind of look at where this comes to a point here and just determine as your eye moves across the screen, do these points kind of fall along the same plane? Sometimes that just kind of helps too, just to kind of keep you on track, because then you kind of get that visual weight, at least a little bit similar. At the top here, I'm kind of determining that I may want to adjust that as well. And again, I'm just kind of doing it the opposite way now. So if this was upside down, does this look similar? You could go as far as making a copy, and like I said before, you could kind of compare it that way. It looks like I probably have some room to maybe taper that a little bit more. The thing is, though, is I have to be careful how much I taper that, because it may end up getting to be too much, and it may look a little too weird. These inner lines might start to look a little too thin. So again, that's kind of that balance that I'm talking about. Another thing you could do if you needed to is you could just even widen it out a little bit. That is another way you can kind of manage that. But ultimately, when I back up here, the goal that I'm after is that I want this to kind of feel a similar weight to that M. And what I can do here, what I've done before, you can go through and maybe overlay the M in the background there. You can kind of get an idea of the width. What that tells me is that I'm probably a little bit too wide here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of nudge things in a little bit. And I'm only going to do a little bit at a time. I may even put that M in the background again. And it's just going to be a little bit at a time until I'm happy with how this looks. And also just kind of manage how many points I'm selecting at once there. But all I'm doing is I'm just taking these outer pieces and just kind of bumping them in a little bit more. Now the thing is, because I have an angled piece here, it's kind of overshoot in a way. So I don't think I need to line that exactly up with the width of the M. I can kind of let those be overshoot. I've also got some negative space off in the corners here as well. So there are a few things that I can kind of keep my eye on as I'm adjusting this inward. That maybe it doesn't need to be so drastic, but maybe something like that. Again, keeping my plane, just kind of determining how that top is working out for us. Maybe I even do something like that so this looks even to that. But really, it's just all about kind of managing the weight there, and does it look right? The W actually can be a little bit tricky in this regard, because it's just, sometimes it just wants to throw a fuss over how this is looking. Maybe rather than tapering, we just kind of bump that out a little bit more. I think I have the space and the ability to do that. But again, in this case with the W, we want to take a look at these two lines here and make sure that they feel maybe they're kind of similar weight to that. These two lines here would be similar to the angle of the J there. I think that might actually have some benefit to get bumped out a little bit. And I think what I'm going to do is we're just going to do it on this one over here, because I can kind of, at least in my eye, compare those two a little bit easier. And I think, yeah, a little extra weight is going to help that out a bit. And again, you can kind of go back and forth. You can open up your preview window along the bottom here. Take a look, make it really small or make it really big. C is, maybe that wasn't the move. We can kind of go back and adjust these things, and just, it's all about tweaking. And I find, especially these smaller sizes here, that sometimes things like weight can really become obvious very quickly if you're on the right track or not. Because sometimes you make a decision that looks good at a larger size, but it throws it out of sorts at these lower sizes here. But overall, I think it looks like a pretty decent W. Kind of mimics the width of the M there a little bit. The weight looks pretty even across these four letters that I've got up on my screen. We're just going to go ahead and borrow the side bearings of the V because they're similar enough. So we'll count that as another letter finished. Now again, a letter that shares the DNA with the V is going to be the lowercase y. For this, it's going to look a little bit similar to what we did back on the J. We're going to go through and we're going to steal some pieces of the T there, and then just go through and get this into position. I could use my lowercase j if I want to kind of get things lined up a little bit, so those overshoots don't look too far apart, which I think I only did about 2 units. Looks like that's where that one's falling. So we'll move that out of the way so I don't have two competing descending characters there. So now the thing is with the Y here is that I have a perfectly vertical stem, but I have an angled stem that it needs to turn into. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and delete that vertical stem, and we're just going to kind of bring this down a little bit. So maybe it just kind of continues down a little bit more, as if that shape were to keep going. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and maybe kick this out. And actually, while I'm looking at it, and maybe this is where I should have started, I wonder if this ending here might actually be a better choice for us, as I see how this starts to shape up, and I think that might be the right choice. So what we'll do is I'm going to go through, we're just going to kind of move this over a little bit, and then holding down the Option key, I'm just going to kind of drag this back. And so what we're starting to do is kind of line this up so that eventually I can drag this point down and it's going to feel like a continuous curve. I'm going to go ahead and do the same here as well. And you may need to kind of play around with it a little bit. I don't think I was actually too far off on my first try here. We're actually just going to bring that down a little bit more so we can kind of tighten up that curve a little bit. And similar to like what we did with the lowercase s, a good amount of this again, you're probably noticing a trend here, but trial and error, making sure this line feels nice and consistent, that we're not getting any kind of weird bumps or anything like that. Sometimes if it helps, we can go through and we can attempt to combine these two shapes here. Sometimes that wants to work, sometimes it doesn't. It looks like today Glyphs Mini is choosing violence for me. Not sure why I'm not getting those two to combine. One thing we could do to kind of overcome that is maybe just open up these two shapes. Let's see, there we go. So we'll get them to combine that way. Also go through here and correct my path directions. And then we'll just kind of work on getting these to be some kind of decent shapes, decent curves there. Not too bad for a Y. So one other thing that I'm going to do is I do want to go and kind of have this be that traditional angled join there. Sometimes you may have to add a little bit more taper in. I'm not going to worry about where this meets. It meets a little bit below the baseline. That little dent there meets a little bit below the baseline, but quite honestly, I'm okay with that. I think that's still going to work out pretty well. So we'll go ahead and we'll add the side bearings of the V to the Y there. If we back up a little bit, take a look, how things are shaping up in the preview panel down below. I'd say that's looking pretty decent for a V. Or for a Y. Again, when I kind of compare it to that J, it looked pretty decent. When I put it next to things like the V, the Y, the M, all that, I think it's looking pretty good. We could go and start adding it into other words or letters and seeing, is this stacking up the way we want? Is it looking kind of decent? And again, as you do more type design, you'll start to see probably more things that you could adjust or change or edit. But the goal of this is we're just trying to create something fairly basic and simple, something modular that's going to look pretty decent for your first font here. So I would say something like that looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and check the lowercase y off the list. Now the two next ones that I'm kind of looking at here are the K and the X, because these two are going to kind of have some similar things going on. I'm leaving the Z for last here because that's just kind of its own set of fun. I think to start though, we're going to go with the X, and on the side here I'm just going to pull in a V. So we can kind of use this to start, but it's not where we're going to end either. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of get these two parts separate from each other. And let's see here, I had 80, I think this was 70, yeah. So I'm going to take the taper out of that. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in my O here in the background. And at least to start, I'm going to kind of use that as a gauge for how wide did I make this. Similar to the S, we're going to have a little bit of a taper going on here. So the top part of the X is going to be smaller and narrower than the bottom part, where it's going to get a little bit wider. So that's something that we'll want to keep in mind. And then for this one, that was a width of 75. So rather than reuse this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this. We're going to flip it around, and let's see here. So we get 75. So your thicker line is going to be the one running from the top left down to the bottom right, and then the one running from the bottom left to the top right is going to be a little bit thinner. So we'll just kind of use this to get started, and then what I'm going to do is we're just going to kind of pull the top together a little bit closer. I'm also going to kind of flip my preview window open on this, because I may just want to keep an eye on how things are shaping up down here, because I may need to add or subtract weight as we go here. Which I think for this one that's probably going to work. I'm also going to add in a couple control characters off to the side there, so I can just kind of keep an eye on that as well. The other thing that I like to do sometimes is I like to select the whole thing and just kind of mirror it back and forth. It's just kind of allowing me to see if I have these two triangular shapes centered, which it looks like they're pretty close. As far as this one goes here, I'm going to add some weight to it. It's mostly out of curiosity, but I think that kind of works. And I think the width looks pretty decent too here. Using that O to kind of help establish this really helped. You know, again, there's a little bit of what I would call overshoot to either side of this, you know, compared to the round shape of the O, but that I think is something that I want. And yeah, I would say that's pretty good. I'm kind of debating. Yeah, it looks like the top was off a little bit, so we'll kind of adjust that as well. Now the thing with an X in this case is we do get a little bit of visual stuff going on here, because it actually looks like this line isn't perfectly in line with the top part of it. It looks like it might have got cut off, or it's jagged somehow. And this is kind of a fun little trick that you have to deal with when you're doing an X. It's like if you take a straw and put it in a drinking glass, it's kind of a similar visual effect. And so typically what you'll see designers do here is go through and find my knife tool. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and we're going to create two pieces out of that line. So nothing's changed out here yet, but on the inside, my X is now 3 pieces instead of 2. And the way we kind of adjust the X a little bit is we take these 2 lines and we just offset them from each other just a little bit. Doesn't tend to need to be much, depending on your typeface, but let's see here. And maybe in this case, because this is so simple, I don't need to make it too much, but it's just enough. You'll notice that that if I were to line this up, these 2 lines just kind of run past each other. What you'll find is it doesn't need to be too much of a difference. However, what you will notice is that line now looks like it's a continuous line. And similar to what we've done in the past with things like the V, where things kind of join together a little bit, we also have them taper in a little as well. And again, that taper just kind of helps manage, similar to down here, it just kind of helps manage this intersection here so that it doesn't look really thick and bulky. It doesn't take too much to get the adjustment that we want and kind of that look that we want, but all that for 2 lines that just kind of intersect each other. You'd think a character that looks so unassuming like an X would be easier, but it's interesting to see kind of the visual trickery that goes on there. So yeah, looking down kind of at my smaller preview here, I'm pretty thrilled with how that looks. So we can just go ahead to RK, and we're going to take what we learned from our X and apply it here. So the easy part of the K is we're just going to rip off the lowercase l there for the vertical stem, and then I'm going to go ahead here and we're just going to select these two pieces. So that'll be kind of the start of the K here a little bit. And then we have to think about what our K is going to look like. Now there's a couple ways to do it. We can have this top angled line here go into the vertical stem and then have the leg of the K sprout out from that. We could do more of an intersection where it's kind of like an arrow pointing into the K where everything kind of intersects at one point. You get a few different options with the K here. I guess it's in some ways similar to, let's say, a lowercase g, where you can kind of have some fun with that. Usually my preference is to go with the version of a K where the top arm here just meets kind of in there, and then we'll have the leg sprout out. And the reason that I like that is it kind of helps it feel a little bit wider. So what I'm going to do, similar to a lot of other things, is we're going to have like the V or the W or the X, where it's going to be a little bit wider here. It's going to taper in to the vertical stem, also kind of what we did with the N here to some degree. And I think what I'm going to kind of aim for here is the width of the N with a little bit of overshoot. We'll kind of use that as maybe a starting point. I don't mind if the K gets a little wide because we're also going to have some negative space in here as well. That's going to have some fun with what I'm doing. I'm also going to shorten up this leg here, but then if I drag it back in, it doesn't need to come out a ton. But what we do want, similar to the X, similar to the S, is this line here, the leg should kick out a little bit further than the arm. So we'll kind of play around with that a little bit. Where things meet here, maybe I add a little point just so that doesn't intersect too much. Again, we've got some tapering going on there. But the idea is if I was to put, let's say, the X kind of on either side of the K here, this, they should all look fairly even. And we can kind of play around with how that all works and looks. And don't be afraid to look down at your preview down here. If something's not working, sometimes, again, those smaller sizes, you'll pick up on that, and you'll see that. One thing I'm looking at the lowercase, or sorry, the smaller version here, is that my arm needed to drop down a little bit more. It's something that just, it kind of maybe mimics that angle a little bit. Doesn't need to be exact, and it probably shouldn't be exact, but you know, enough that it was enough that my eye caught it and noticed it, so we're going to drop that down a little bit more there. Again, just making sure that we kind of have a taper going on as it's going into the vertical stem there. As I do that, maybe I kind of thicken that leg back up a little bit more and kind of kick things out a little bit. And it's trial and error, adjust, adjust, adjust. But you can kind of see it's starting to come together. So we'll go ahead and we'll throw in an N and V on there for some side bearings. And honestly, I don't think it looks too terrible. And really all it is if I put the letter I'm working on in a line up here and it doesn't stand out, it looks like it belongs. It, you know, that my eye would kind of gloss right over it. And I know that sounds weird, but you know, we don't want one letter to stand out from the rest. So that's kind of the test that I'm doing here is something like the weight too much where my eye catches it, is the shape where all these pieces are intersecting. You know, does it look funky where my eye kind of stops and goes, you know, something's not right here. That's what we're looking at, and then just kind of adjusting accordingly. Again, making sure, you know, are these lines or these shapes here even weights to, you know, their counterparts. Things like the X and the V are good ways to kind of compare. And again, it takes a little bit of trial and error, but you know, I think things like our grid helps. I think that really kind of pulls it together nicely and kind of, limits you from making a lot of mistakes or getting too far down a rabbit hole. So with that, I think I'm pretty thrilled with how the K looks. So, like the end of the alphabet, I think we'll go ahead and we'll finish this episode with the last letter, the lowercase z. And for this, I think what we're going to do is we're going to pull in the lowercase n here and just use that as kind of a guide to the width, at least to start. So all these letters that we've done, it feels like the Z never really fits into anything very well. I might even pull the S in too, just for some additional guidance here, because the S is actually going to have a similar situation where we want that top to be a little bit narrower. So maybe something like that. But anyway, the Z, it's or the Z if you prefer the non-American version of it, but it just sometimes to me doesn't feel like it really fits into any rhyme or reason, because we've got some horizontal lines here that, these are going to need to get a little bit smaller for sure, and then you've got this line going backwards, this spine going backwards, and that's where your weight needs to be. It's kind of like a reverse S, I guess, in a way. I've always found it a little bit maddening to try and deal with. I don't know how other people tend to feel about it, but yeah, sometimes it just gives me fits. The other thing that I might do is kind of not make that look so blocky on the end there, so we'll bring that down so that it's an even coarse grid unit away from our X height and our baseline. And then really all it just comes down to is putting some weight in there and determining if we got this right. Sometimes it might even just need some goofy adjusting or something like that. I am going to try and keep these two maybe not so in line with each other. Maybe I can get away with it because it's almost kind of acting as overshoot a little bit. Visually, I want kind of that trapezoidal shape, I think is the right phrase for it, that or triangular shape if you want to go that route, that the S has. It's just going to be a little bit of visual trickery to try and figure out if we're on the right path or not. And like I've said before so often, it's pulling up a preview window and trying to determine if you're on the right path or not. Do these angles look the same? If I pull in a V, I guess I can kind of maybe get some idea of whether things are going right or wrong. The tough part too is like I said, it feels so backwards from every other letter you've done. And then, you've got things like where lines kind of join together here in kind of a goofy spot. It's almost like an uppercase N. Maybe there's some taper in there. We can kind of pull that up a little bit. I've seen that before too, where you can kind of lose some weight there. The only thing, in my opinion, is it looks a little bit weird horizontally to see a taper like that. So I may just end up leaving that. But the thing is because you want some weight here, it's just difficult to determine if you're on the right track or not. Because you want to keep this fairly even. Similar to the S in the other direction, you want that spine to look pretty even. Honestly, too, it's part of the reason why I like to bring this down a little bit down here. If I went really, if I made that really drastic, you can kind of see that it can kind of shave out some weight there, which kind of helps you out a little bit. I don't know if I wanted it to go that far, but it's a tricky letter. It's you kind of do what you can with it, and that's about as much as I know. Sometimes the spacing needs maybe a little bit more. It's a tough one. I take some solace, at least in English, that this is a word or a letter that you typically don't use very much, so you don't have to see it all the time. But yeah, personally, out of all the letters, and similar to an X, it's one that I tend to have a little bit of a struggle with. The grid kind of helps a little bit. You kind of get, I don't know. It's easier to maybe kind of lock into a weight or a system with it. When you're doing something modular, it just kind of helps eliminate or some possibilities or avenues where you can make mistakes with it. But it is, in my opinion, one of the more unique letters that you have to deal with, just because there really isn't a whole lot else you can go off of. The weight. You've got this line here, which doesn't really compare to this one here. It's got to have the weight of the letter. So then you're comparing it to a line that, or a stem that goes in a different direction. And then how does that weigh against the round shapes? How does that weigh against the straight ones? It's a little bit of a back and forth. Again, it's kind of why I'm a proponent of designing one of your first fonts on a little bit of a grid, because it kind of snaps into a different place or two. So you can kind of get it maybe a little bit closer, a little bit quicker. But all that said, that completes our modular lowercase alphabet first font in Glyphs Mini. And hopefully you've been enjoying the series through these first 5 episodes. Hopefully you've been learning a lot. As always, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so that you know when the next episode in the series comes out. As you can see, we've got a few letters to go here. We've got the whole uppercase to do and numbers and a little bit of punctuation. But I think we're going to have a lot of fun as we get through the rest of that. If there's anything that you would add, maybe do differently, or something that you're seeing where maybe you have a little bit of advice that you wish to share, as always, the comment section is open below, and I always look forward to hearing people's thoughts as we go through this series. But as always, if you've been following along, definitely appreciate you taking some time to view this and hopefully learn a little bit along the way. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next episode.